You could. Well, we're going to start here. Looks like it's going to be up. We'll turn on. So. It's really funny. Yeah. Yeah, just introduce myself. Okay. We run through the overall that there we go. She's working pretty hard. Courses that she's taking, like fluid dynamics, finite mathematical analysis. Before that, she had she had differential equations. One thing after that. I have to remind her. Yeah. Well, I tell her you have to have a team. Anyway, we'll see you around 3 or 4 days.
I think that was
At 9:30. Yeah, really low turnout. Did you get the art school? Did you know how good? We can blow through the intros here within 15 minutes, and then we'll just have to trim more. So I may start a little bit late, just given that.
ready?
We have some issues. We don't have our exclusive. So I don't know if they're going to plug in. And then JD is running on 15. So I'm gonna wait another 5 minutes.
Okay. So I also got an email from he will be calling on behalf of
But I don't think Jorge was on the panel.
No, he wasn't on the panel, but just that was one of the SPOs.
Here. Good morning. Kat, were you in a plane coming over? Did you plan?
I feel like
Oh, okay. This is what
Yes. So Wes is the email about kind of architecture and environmental. Right. When I get back. Excited. Ready to go library and go to the data.
So the 20 was your name.
I didn't want to do it, so I was like, okay.
Yeah, so this.
But it's sitting right there. That is weird. I was for that. I knew you guys were going to ask me, just so you know. Three different directors. So I like to
Are we on? Okay. I think we'll get started, folks. Welcome to this foggy/sunny, maybe foggy, maybe sunny day. I hope it's going to turn out to be sunny. I was in Yakima 2 days ago. It was nothing but fog, and then come to the Tri-Cities, and the sunshine. So it was nice. So we have, I think, a really good, you want to call it, program today on value-based purchasing. And Wes, in particular, spent a lot of time putting this together. We have several of our own as experts going to, first of all, talk about what they're doing, and we want to leave as much time as we can for your questions. And as you see in your program, teeing this up will be a distance presentation from an analyst at the Healthcare Authority. So that's it. We're going to get started now because we're a little late and sort of the people coming in is a little late as well. But I do want to start like we always do with self-introductions. And the question of the day is what's going on is it November 23rd this year? What's going on Thanksgiving in your life? So we'll start with Shani Haas. And please speak up because we do have people on the phone here from afar.
My name is Shani Haas, from Signal Health in Yakima. I have a new daughter-in-law last Friday. Last Thursday, Friday, Saturday. His weddings are now 4 days long. So we'll be home. From our native summer. Thank you.
All right. Next.
I'm Julie, this is with Planned Parenthood, and for Thanksgiving, we always go to Seattle. We take my husband and my 4 kids go to Seattle to see some family drama. This year.
That's always a good idea. Okay. Next.
I'm Susan Gibson, also from Planned Parenthood, and I'm going to be spending it with my family.
All right.
I'm Shelley Little from the Franklin Health District, and I'll probably play golf in the morning and eat in the afternoon.
Whoa. Okay. So then, Miguel.
Casino with Comprehensive, and Joe's going to spend a quiet weekend. His own structure.
Okay. Got Friday off, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Jack.
Jack Davis, Northwest Rural Health Network, just spending things on with my adult kids.
Great. Okay. Dr. I guess you're next. Dr. Jacob.
Health officer in Farming County, and I'll be at home with the family, kids, grandkids. Big guy.
Oh boy.
Susan Campbell from CBD, and spending time with friends.
Okay. Dr. Person.
Any person that may have health issues, I would be trying to get caught up on work.
Oh no. Oh no. We got to convince you to do something. Anybody have a place at the table in the Tri-Cities?
Yeah.
Okay.
I cover me some boards, and my husband and I will be spending quiet time at home, and maybe cooking a duck on the barbecue.
Doc. That'll be interesting.
I'm Luann Ayers with United Way, and I'm going to be cooking dinner for 12 at a hotel in McMinnville. Wow. I should say Chef of Costco and I.
Okay. Yakima Valley Farm Workers, right? Nice. Okay. And Seahawks fan. Tell us your name, rank, and serial number, your organization, and what you're doing on Thanksgiving.
Wow, that's a lot of information. My name is Rex, I work for Tri-City Community Health Operations. What I'm doing for Thanksgiving, haven't a clue, but I hope to have some turkey.
Okay.
Haley Middleton, PBK. I am planning on just having dinner with him.
Always good.
We didn't get Corey.
Corey. Corey? Go ahead. Okay, you don't know the drill here, but please tell your colleagues here what's going on Thanksgiving in your life.
I'll be having Thanksgiving dinner with family.
All right, thank you. We're done. Kat.
Cat Lefay, Community Health Plan of Washington, and my husband and dogs are going up north of the border in Canada to have sushi.
Wow. Okay.
Each other from Memorial Health, and I am headed to Sacramento.
Okay. So far you got the honor for the longest trip on Thanksgiving.
Yeah, flying with the masses, which should be meeting.
Yeah.
Here, Foster from Australia Huntington Hospital, and we'll be having Thanksgiving with family and my baby's birthday.
Good. Congrats. That's
Dr.
good.
Gonzalez, Tri-Cities Health Center, and not sure yet what I'm doing.
Okay. All right. There's another person who could maybe have a place at the table someplace somewhere, right? Are you new to the community?
Absolutely, 2 weeks.
2 weeks in. Okay. Well, welcome. Rhonda.
So, I'm Ronnie Batchelor, and I'm a Lutheran Community Services transition into crisis response unit. Blood Pro program. I start my new job on the 5th.
Oh.
Great news there. I have so many invites, so I am gonna be on an adventure on Thanksgiving because I don't know what they're cooking, and I have 10 invites, and I plan on hitting each one of them. And landing at the mission by the end of the day.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
That's a big day.
Yeah, you're gonna be
I'm gonna be
you're gonna
driving.
burn off your calories. Is it Ed? Chuck, sorry.
I'm Chuck Eaton. I volunteer with Blue Mountain Park and Park. Thanksgiving is gonna be Wednesday because my youngest granddaughter is in the honor guard, for WSU. And WSU is going places this year. She has to be in Pullman to practice on Thanksgiving.
Wow. Tough duty. Ruben?
Director outside, Greater Columbia, GCACH. As usual, we're gonna spend at my sister's in Richmond. It starts on Wednesday. It's a whole weekend, 4 or 5 days. That's when, I'm one of 10 siblings, so that's.
Oh, wow.
When they live out of town, they start arriving, and we start partying on Wednesday night. And we eat tamales, birria, of course, turkey. We do not have Thanksgiving without turkey, but that's how we roll with my family. On Friday, we're gonna receive a cruise with the Huskies.
Any Huskies around to take umbrage over that one?
There's a state that for anybody who, doesn't have any plans today.
Okay. Our former president, what's going on?
Hi, everybody, I'm so we're gonna go over my mother-in-law. Exciting thing, actually, my wife's cousin, one of the tech writers on the show called The Resident. And actually, he has a play coming out called 99 Tropes that premiering at Seattle, that Seattle. You guys are in Seattle, 24th and 99 Crows. 99 what? 99 Crows. It's about comedy about writing. He's a writer for
Wow. Got some talent there, Marcy. In the family. Okay. So, any latecomers that I missed? Yes. Oh, Marcy, sorry, missed you, Marcy.
Okay. Marissa Engels, coordinated chair. I guess the question is Thanksgiving plan. I will actually be in Las Vegas for a basketball tournament.
Good. You're not playing.
No, I am supporting, the Carolina Tar Heels, and, my in-laws are supporting the Michigan State Park.
Wow. So, yeah, you got the award so far for the longest trip. And Marcy?
Marcy Durbin, people for future Yakima, and I'll be driving to Bellingham to pick up my nephew.
Okay. Drive safe. Okay, we'll start.
Okay. I'm Diane Tompkins from Neighborhood Health, Yakima Neighborhood Health, and I will be in Yakima for Thanksgiving, spending it with my parents and my family.
Okay.
I'm Lisa Bassner from Yakima Neighborhood Health that we're hosting, so we'll have family over.
Okay.
I'm Michelle Sullivan with Yakima Neighborhood Health Services, and we are hosting as well.
I'm Rhonda Hoff from Yakima Neighborhood Health Services, and I'm driving to Portland, to be hosted by my daughter and all of her friends who are transplants to Portland.
Nice. No kitchen duty.
Not to me. I'm taking the line.
Dan?
I'm Diane Halo with Greater Columbia ACH, and we're doing the turkey trot. In the morning, as a big group with my family, and then we'll have dinner in the afternoon.
Good. Gonna prepare for that meal.
It's a, we'll tell you. It's a 5K.
You'll have to go.
You can either do a mile or a 5K, down at Columbia Park.
Jenna Shelton, Greater Columbia ACH. I'll be watching my husband playing a turkey bowl, and then with my in-laws in Yakima for Thanksgiving.
All right.
Becky Coleman, Greater Columbia. We'll be having family over for dinner, cooking.
Good. Okay.
Martin Sanchez, Greater Columbia ACH, for Thanksgiving. My wife and I will be driving to Granger to visit my parents, and then coming back up to Pasco, later in the afternoon and spending it with my my wife's family.
Okay. Not quite like Ruben's, schedule, but
No.
a little bit of moving around. Carol?
I'm Carol Moser, Greater Columbia ACH. We will be actually flying back from San Diego on Thanksgiving because
Okay.
we're leaving tomorrow for a bit of a vacation to enjoy the sun and the sand.
Yay!
Okay, so you.
My staff is like, yes!
Come back refreshed.
Mr. Lucky?
I just got back from vacation, so a little bit of a temperature shock here. So, I'm Wes Lucky, I'm with the Greater Columbia, and I'll be, hosting dinner for friends and family, probably 10 or more people. And I'll be doing all the cooking, which I like to do.
All right. Come over and take lessons. Ashley?
Ashley Fernandez, Greater Columbia staff, and, we'll be hosting, some friends, at our house. Breaking tradition a little bit, just gonna eat a bunch of steel heads. So, those of you who love the turkey, we may also be going to Coeur d'Alene that weekend.
Oh,
The next
okay.
visit with friends.
When the lights get turned on, if you know that, that's a big tree lighting and it's pretty spectacular in Coeur d'Alene on Friday night.
Okay, well then we'll definitely.
Okay, good. Yes, it's really quite beautiful. Lauren?
I'm Lauren Johnson. I'm with Greater Columbia ACH, and for Thanksgiving, we'll be spending time with my soon-to-be in-laws in Yakima.
Okay, in Yakima. Okay. So who just came in late? I saw somebody, yes. So, what are you doing on Thanksgiving besides your name and organization?
My name is Carmen Paulo from Catholic Church, and, actually, we just came back from Portugal last week.
Portugal?
And it was 8 hours difference, so it was hard to communicate with my boys here in Washington State. So, I have family far away in Germany, in Peru, where I am from, and in Atlanta, Georgia, my sister is there. So my boys are gonna come, and that's, lovely, because I don't get to see them even when they are 5 hours away, often. But we will communicate constantly, but it's not the same that you can hug them and see them once and the heart. So, I'm gonna be just having a reunion.
All right, well, fascinating. All right, have I missed anybody? Oh, yes, sir, from the fire department.
And Sheriff, Pasco Fire Department, one of the many key players.
And what are your Thanksgiving Day plans is the question of the day.
I am not working.
For sure. All right, well, let's get started then. Oh, I'm sorry. Do we have people on the phone?
Yes.
Okay, so those of you on the phone, if you just wouldn't mind introducing yourselves, and just tell the group very quickly, what your Thanksgiving Day plans are.
Hi, this is Sherry Snow White, and I'm going to drink lots of chocolate.
All right, and Sherry, you're with what organization?
Oh, Amerigroup, sorry.
Okay, Amerigroup, very good.
Hi, this is Berta Lopez with Virginia Mexican Memorial. And I'm planning on taking 3 days off and relaxing, cooking, and spending time with family.
Sounds like a plan. Anybody else?
This is Carla Frack from from Quality Behavioral Health, and I actually have no plans yet.
All right, an honest person, no plans. Could you say your name again one more time? We had a little bit of override.
Samantha Frederick.
Okay, thank you. So I heard a couple other voices there. Could you also tell us?
This is Joyce Newsom with 211.
Okay, Joyce. Thank you. And Thanksgiving Day plans?
I'm supposed to be going to California.
Sounds good. Okay. Anybody
Good
else?
morning. This is JD Fisher from the Healthcare Authority. Thanks for inviting me to participate. And my wife and our 2 foster kids and dog will be going to Seattle to visit an old friend for Thanksgiving.
All right. That's not too far a trek. Good. And JD, you're going to be on here in just a few minutes, so stay tuned.
Great. And I'm getting a little echo from people on the phone. Is that coming through on your end when I talk? I just want to make sure we're not...
Not really, but I would ask all those on the phone, if you're not speaking, to press your phone on mute to do what we can to reduce that echo. Anybody else on the phone?
Hi, this is Denise Wong from Molina Healthcare, and my plan is to let my sister cook for Thanksgiving.
It's good to have siblings now then, isn't it?
Yes.
Anybody else?
This is Corey with Southeast Washington, and I plan to spend the day with my 4 grandchildren.
That's good. Yeah. The joys. I heard another voice there. We have more on than we thought.
Yep, this is Rob Devins with Lutheran Community Services, and I'm traveling to San Francisco to spend Thanksgiving with them.
Nice. So you're with Lutheran Services?
Yes.
And your name? I'm sorry, we didn't catch that for our notes.
Rob Devins.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Rob. And Kirk Williamson with Benton Franklin Community Health Alliance. I'll be spending a quiet Thanksgiving with my bride of 50 years.
You're going to cook for her, aren't you?
Absolutely.
All right. Anybody else?
Hey, Patrick, this is Carla Brock from the Health District, Benton Franklin County, and I'm cooking for everybody.
Good for you, Carla. Okay. Anybody else? Lots of people on the phone. Okay. I think we'll go ahead and get started then with staff reports. We're running a little bit late, but did we hear from, Kat, did we hear from Caitlin?
I was on a phone call with her at 8 o'clock this morning, so.
Okay. Okay. We're just trying to make sure we've got a panel here that is prepared to dialogue. So, Carol, why don't you start?
Well, I would just say that since we're running a little late and this is all narrative and you can all read, that we will just allow you to read our Greater Columbia ACH report, which is full of lots of really good information. So we encourage you to read that. We're trying to put more information about upcoming webinars and trainings that are very relevant to what you do. So look for those also in the newsletter. But I think that we'll just go right to the program.
Sure. Okay, because we're missing 2 people. So we hope that we will have those panelists show up before the end of JD's presentation. So we will get started then. In your packet, there's a little bio on JD, and as you can see, he's a senior analyst at HCA, and he's in the office that we care about today, which is the Office for Paying for Value. And we thought, Wes, Carol, and I, that this would be a very appropriate topic, and it's a bit complex, but I've seen the presentation by JD, and I think he can unpack it for us a little bit, and then we'll have more opportunities to really try to get down to some of the questions that you may have about value-based purchasing after his presentation. So do we have his presentation ready to go?
JD, would you like me to switch you to the presenter? Are you ready?
Sure, that'll work. And then I'll just run the PowerPoint from my end. Is that how it'll work?
Yep, so you'll share your screen, and then your screen will be up on the GoToMeeting and on the screen here in the meeting.
Okay. All right, is that showing up?
You're almost there. There you go.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, good morning again, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to this group. I greatly appreciate it, and I hope this is of value and useful to everyone in participation there. I want to note that this is a pretty long deck, and I know we have 45 minutes for the presentation itself and some time after for questions. So there will be a few slides I won't go into great detail on, but I wanted to make sure to include them so that you would all have them after the fact, and you could review them and shoot any questions you had at a later date back to me. So if I give something short shrift, don't think I'm trying to move past it. It's something I wanted to make sure you had eyes on, but I just might not have time to really dive in. So today I want to just talk about the what, the why, and the how of value-based purchasing from the Healthcare Authority's perspective. And again, my name is J.D. Fisher. I am a Senior Health Policy Analyst here at the Healthcare Authority. So a little background about what we do at the Healthcare Authority. We are the largest healthcare purchaser in the state of Washington. We have an annual healthcare spend of over $12 billion, and that presently crosses the Medicaid program and the Public Employee Benefits program, and by 2021 that will also include school employee benefits, which will add about 140,000 more covered lives and another few $100 million in spend. I think we'll be close to 14 billion actually by that point. So we have a lot of power to drive change across the state in the healthcare market, and we intend to do just that. We're seeking to drive change through altering incentives and really driving incentives that reward patient-centered, high-quality care, that reward partner health plan and health system performance, and drive standardization across our programs. So what is value-based purchasing, and what do we mean by value? Terminology is very important, and it can be kind of confusing in some of these conversations, so I want to do a little level setting. There are three common terms that get thrown out when we talk about value-based purchasing and VBP, and the important thing to note is they're all centered around the same thing of better quality, lower cost or contained cost growth, and better outcomes and patient satisfaction. So value-based purchasing is really about the contractual arrangements between a purchaser or an employer and their contracted health plan. So for instance, the Healthcare Authority and our MCOs, or the Healthcare Authority and our health plans through the Public Employee Benefits Program. Value-based payments then are payments made from a payer, like an MCO or one of our commercial health plan partners, to a provider that rewards provider performance on quality and cost and patient experience or other metrics. And value-based care is when providers provide care to consumers and patients that is based on and has an emphasis on quality and improved outcomes. It's not just the classic status quo fee-for-service system. So when we talk about rewarding and sustaining higher value care through VBP, this can mean different things for providers in different settings, but it's really about incentivizing higher value care. VBP can really take one of two forms, and there are a variety of iterations in these buckets, but this is generally what it would look like. Number one would be providers receiving bonus payments or paying penalties for meeting or not meeting quality or cost metrics. Ideally, quality and cost are linked to the degree of bonuses or penalties that are paid. This can take the form of a pay-for-performance contract where the base fees or payment structure is not modified based on performance, but there is a bonus on top of the baseline payment structure. The other major bucket is where providers take on risks themselves for a population or a subset of benefits or episode of care and retain the reward or penalty associated with cost and quality. This looks like global capitation arrangements or bundled payment arrangements, some of which we are engaged in our employee benefits program. So why is VBP important and why are we so focused on this concept? Well, we believe that VBP changes the incentive structure and ultimately leads to that system change that we desire. It ensures accountability for higher quality care, patient experience, and keeps costs in perspective. We also prioritize ensuring appropriateness of care, meaning that patients get the right care at the right time and in the right place. I want to throw in a plug here for the Washington Health Alliance. They've done some great work around measuring healthcare waste. And they recently did a one-year study of about 1.3 million individuals in Washington state, and found that about 36% of the healthcare spend associated with these patients were for low-value treatments or procedures. This amounted to over $280 million in unnecessary spending. So the healthcare authority is really excited about this tool and hoping that we can leverage it to drive some more efficiencies and improvements in our purchasing strategies. And all that being said, we do want to account for and aim to improve provider experience. We know that there are a lot of changes swirling, that some of these changes are very difficult, new, and pose significant challenges to infrastructure and basic understanding of, where we're going versus where current provider capacity is. So we're very cognizant of those challenges and want to make sure we're paying attention to provider experience and working with providers to make sure that transitions are smooth and providers feel supported. We do believe that payment drives system transformation and that incentives matter. We are confident that transforming the payment structure will bring about the system transformation we desire. It will help us move from a fragmented approach to care, both clinically and financially, to an integrated system that supports coordinated whole-person care. Members who have previously been left out of their healthcare decisions will be better engaged and activated, empowered to take on a greater role in their own health. We do this largely through shared decision-making and health literacy work, and also making sure that providers are supported in engaging patients in some of that shared decision-making. In fact, the Washington State Healthcare Authority is leading the way, and we are the first state to certify patient decision aids for providers. So that's an exciting achievement for the state. And we will drive standardization in performance measurement and foundational aspects of accountability and transparency. This is hugely important, especially when it comes to providers engaging with multiple payers, having to perform against different quality measures that might even be the same measure but have different definitions and different numerators and denominators can cause confusion and add some unnecessary discrepancy. And so we are striving to really promote the statewide common measure set and do our best to align the quality measures in our contracts from that measure set. One of my colleagues, Laura Pennington, has done a great crosswalk of all the measures in our contracts, and I think there are 5 total that cross over across all the contracts, from Medicaid to public employees, and then there's a few that are specific to those target populations. We do have a vision that is driving this work, and our ultimate vision is a healthier Washington. We will drive towards this vision by leveraging our authority as a state agency and the influence we have as the largest purchaser in the state. And to that end, we've established some very ambitious purchasing goals. By 2021, our aim is to see that 90% of state-financed healthcare payments made to providers are linked to value, meaning quality and cost considerations. Our underlying goals to that target is that we continually strive for the quadruple aim of better care, smarter spending, healthier people, and more satisfied providers. We aim to align our purchasing philosophy across all of our healthcare programs. That includes Medicaid, public employee benefits, and soon to be coming school employee benefits. That means not only the quality measures, but how we're assessing performance. We have a homegrown quality improvement model that rewards providers for both improvement and attainment of quality performance. We feel that's very important because it's important that providers have an opportunity to incentives, no matter where their starting point is. If they're already high performing, we want to make sure that they're rewarded for being high performing. If they're struggling on a few metrics, we want to make sure that the only reward isn't around achieving a benchmark, but that if they show improvement while still missing the end target, they do get some kind of reward. We exercise significant oversight and quality assurance over our contracted partners and implement corrective action as necessary. And we aim to have our annual health care cost growth be less than the national health expenditure trend. You can see on the bottom right-hand side of this slide, we have annual targets that we set up to meet in terms of our value-based purchasing penetration. And so far, we're 2 for 2. We began measuring in 2016, or for calendar year 2016. We exceeded the target of 20% by 10 percentage points, and we're actually at 30%. In 2017, our target was 30%, and our 2017 actual was 43%. So far, so good. There's a lot of room left to cover and a lot of road left to cross, but we're confident that we're moving in the right direction. Our purchasing philosophy is centered on a set of guiding principles. We go back to these when we are working on developing or implementing a new program or adding changes to current contracts. Number one is the quadruple aim that I described previously. We want to reward the delivery of person and family-centered high-value care, reward the improved performance of our contracted health plans and health systems, align our payment and deliveries reform approaches with other purchasers and payers where appropriate. This includes closely tracking what's happening at the federal level. We are seeking to align with MACRA and CMS programs and their payment transformation activities. We're seeking to drive standardization and care transformation based on evidence and increase the long-term financial sustainability of state healthcare programs. So how are we doing this? If we're really striving for system change and whole person care, it's imperative that we focus on more than just physical health, but also social and behavioral health needs. Emphasize coordination of care across sectors, and make sure that we're allowing for financial flexibility, robust sharing of data, and collaborative leadership across partners. Some of the things we're striving to do in our programs is drive common elements in all our contracts. And data is right smack dab in the middle. We know it's important in basically every facet of BBP. We aim to drive risk sharing down to the provider level so that providers are really understanding and influenced by and have the ability to influence the incentives they face in their contracts, that they are aware of what their expectations are and that they are empowered to make change at the clinic level. We're drawing from the statewide common measure set to put quality measures into our contracts. Again, we have the homegrown quality improvement model that rewards improvement in attainment. And we're really leaning on groups like the BREE Collaborative, who put out evidence-based care transformation recommendations and have begun embedding transformation expectations into our contracts. Some hard examples of some of the VPP work we've done to date, starting with our public employee benefits program. We have an accountable care program, which is an ACO type model with upside and downside risk and incentivizes clinical and quality accountability. We launched a total joint replacement bundle in 2016 through a center of excellence with Virginia Mason. And it's not on this slide, but on 1/1/2019, we will launch a spinal fusion bundle through 2 centers of excellence, one with Virginia Mason again, and one with Capital Medical Center here in Olympia. We just signed this year new contract with Regents to be our TPA starting in 2020 for our self-insured program on the public employee benefits side. a really neat aspect of that contract that really goes to our ability to influence the market beyond our direct purchasing is that in that contract, we require regions to offer a similar ACO type model to its broader book of business. And we are holding them to their own VBP targets from 2020 to, I believe, 2024. In Apple Health and our Medicaid program, we launched a 1.5% premium withhold with our MCOs, and that withhold is tied to the MCOs performing on quality and demonstrating increased value-based payment arrangements with their contracted providers. We are continually moving forward with physical and behavioral health integration and will be statewide by 2020. We are exploring a rural multi-payer model in close partnership with CMS and many regional payers and providers. And I think this is a call out I want to make that we view ACHs as integrally important for this rural multi-payer model, particularly when we think about sustainability. It's a model that we're very excited about, but something that is very challenging. We're looking for ways to align payment structures across payers in a way that allows participating providers to have a global budget of sorts, that they would have clear expectations across payers, and that the data would be smooth and they would have a full view of their patient population. And ACHs are huge in terms of bringing partners together and connecting participating providers with resources. And so as we further develop this model and get closer to implementation, hopefully we will have an agreement with CMS in 2019. We will be really looking to ACHs to support that work in terms of sustainability. And we're in the second year of a 5-year Medicaid transformation waiver with regional VBP goals tied to incentive payments both to ACHs and MCOs. A little more about the Medicaid transformation. I know this is a busy slide, and unfortunately it is an image that I pulled from another deck, so I can't modify it. But it gives a high-level overview of what we're trying to get to, and it's really about moving the Medicaid program away from fee-for-service and towards value-based payment and value-based purchasing to drive delivery system change. Using the district funds to drive that change and really look towards long-term payer, provider, member, and community partnerships and investments that will achieve a sustainable system that really drives towards that whole person care and more efficient system performance. When we talk about whole person care, it's really a roundabout way of talking about clinical integration. And why is this so essential? It's really to get to a point where patients experience a no wrong door approach to care, where wherever they touch the health system, they'll have a seamless experience. They'll be more satisfied with the care. There will be a reduced stigma for behavioral health services and social health services, and a greater likelihood of their needs being met no matter where they interface with the health system. We believe integrated care will improve clinical outcomes for both physical and behavioral health conditions. We have some evidence of this in Southwest Washington that I'll touch on in a moment. We believe this is integral to reducing overall costs of care as unmet needs will be met, and that providers will be better prepared to treat the whole person and connect them with necessary services, even if it is that particular provider's not their area of expertise. They'll be supported to know who to contact, where, and how, and patients will have smooth transitions from one place to the next. We also believe that it will help providers experience a greater satisfaction in their care, that they will see better outcomes in the patients they serve and be more empowered to really be in the driver's seat of those improvements. And this is one of those slides that I warned about at the beginning that's very busy and I don't want to go into great detail on, but it's something that I think you could spend some time really walking through and looking at the difference in kind of the pre-integration landscape and post-integration landscape. And really it's about making sure that our Medicaid program is aligned financially. The dollars are flowing consistently and getting to care that serves both physical and behavioral health needs. So I encourage you to take some time to review this slide after the fact, and I'd be happy to answer questions later, or this isn't, we have some folks in the agency working very closely on this project and would be happy to connect you to them as well. And again, our integration approach is really based on ACH regions, and that's intentional because we believe in supporting accountable communities of health, and that leveraging their influence in their regions is central to a lot of this work. ACHs are uniquely situated to address local issues and enhance regional collaboration, to bring together community partners, including tribes, health plans, hospitals and providers, CBOs and other social service agencies, and counties and public health. They're a great opportunity to convene partners in collaborative environments and really advance the goals of the transformation. This is just a picture of the landscape of behavioral health integration. Again, we aim to be fully integrated across the state by 2020. We have 5 regions that will be integrated in 2019 and then more in 2020. And now I want to share some early results we have from Southwest Washington, who was the early adopter region for physical and behavioral health integration. They are performing better than non-integrated regions on 10 of 19 quality measures. There's statistically significant improvement in adult access to preventive services, some cervical cancer screening, chlamydia screening, hemoglobin A1C testing, antidepressant medication management, and percent homeless and arrested. Next slide is a comparison of a few data points for those last 2 items, percent arrested and percent homeless. There's been a statistically significant drop in percent arrested from 5.7% to 5.5%, and all the while statewide that percent actually went up by 0.1%. Similarly, percent homelessness had a relative change of statistical significance, even though it stayed the same. Statewide, we saw an increase of 0.2%. So these are encouraging findings, and even just a short amount of time for that region, we've been able to see some improvement. And this all gets to the point of the importance of addressing social determinants and how that cannot be left behind when we talk about BBP. This is a really challenging area, and we're learning a lot, and we know there's a lot of room to grow, and we have a lot of improvements left to be made. But we're fully aware that you're less likely to be healthy if you don't have a home, if you don't have a job, you have inadequate access to healthy food. So it's really becoming more and more of a priority for us to find ways we can address social determinants in our purchasing strategies, identify measures that get at social determinants, and some of that is even we're going to have to develop some new measures because this is really new territory across the board. We're doing some of this through the Medicaid transformation. We have supportive housing and employment initiatives under the transformation. The supportive employment services include employment assessment and development of a plan to address barriers, assistance with applications, community resources, and outreach to employers, education, training, and coaching to maintain employment, The supportive housing services include employment assessment and development of a plan to address barriers. Again, assistance with applications and community resources, and then providing education, training, and coaching to help folks maintain housing. This includes outreach to landlords and helping them maintain that housing status. This is a really exciting opportunity and a very unique opportunity to do something new and different with our Medicaid program. These are services that traditionally are not allowed to be financed or funded through Medicaid. So it's really imperative that we demonstrate success in these areas and be able to show CMS that we are not only improving the lives of people through these programs, but also the programs themselves are cost efficient. We've done some interesting analysis about variable costs based on different settings, and I don't have the numbers on hand, but you can imagine the difference in cost for helping someone find consistent, safe housing versus an extended stay in a hospital or an inpatient facility. It's astronomical, the difference. So the savings alone are huge. But beyond the savings, I mean, that improves an individual's life astronomically, gives them stability, takes away some of the stigma of not having housing and having to rely on ERs or hospital stays. And I want to highlight an example of how this initiative is helping an individual in Washington find a job and keep stable housing. This is a story that can be found on our website that centers around Duff, who was a client for the Foundational Community Support Services in Yakima. He was homeless and lived outside for 5 years before receiving care at Yakima Neighborhood Health Services. He was placed in housing and employment with the help of Yakima Neighborhood Services, but he really struggled to navigate the housing and employment systems. There were some cultural differences, those barriers between himself and the support program, and really caused some struggle with maintaining employment and housing, even though he had a strong desire to succeed. The support services provided to Duff through the FCS program eventually supplied him with a case manager who provided him with some consistent care and assistance in navigating unfamiliar systems, removed some of that stigma. He was able to develop a network of accountability and support. And I quote Duff saying, "I got a job and that was kind of it. I just went to work and didn't have anyone coming to the job or anything like that. And all of a sudden my attitude went south. And that's where I wasn't employed. I just going to work." Then Ashley, the supportive services case manager, came along and helped me. Started going to the job interviews with me, calls me when I don't contact, and it makes 100% difference to have someone like that checking on you. It's been really helpful. And Yakima Neighborhood Health Services has been able to see a real change in Duff. His housing has become more stable, keeping his room clean, he's paying his rent on time, he's got a great relationship with his landlord, and he's been able to succeed in his job and held the position with the help of the dedicated employment case manager. And I quote Duff again, "To have someone check on you, it's been really helpful. I probably wouldn't have a job without this service. I never did have a job on the street. Just a lot of days of work because it was hard to make it work without a stable place to live. A place to rest your head is a whole different atmosphere than being on the street. It means everything to me. It makes me feel like a human being in society." So we're starting to see more and more stories like Duff, and it's really encouraging. And I think this program is something we can really build on. So when we talk about how we all have a role to play in VBP, it's important that we consider those roles and consider where we can align our work. And this really isn't about ensuring that folks or organizations stay in their lane, so to speak, but more about supporting all stakeholders to maximize their capacity and really leverage their strengths to the maximum capacity. It's critical that we clarify roles, set clear and ambitious expectations for each other, and really have a collaborative attitude to achieve our VBP goals. And this requires consistent communication with all stakeholders and partners. As the healthcare authority is moving forward with this role exploration work, we're considering roles in a few key areas. Number one, defining the VBP. This is how we express and articulate VBP programs and goals. Delivering of VBP for the actions to achieve stated goals directly or to influence VBP. How are we measuring VBP? We need to identify the measures to assess the achievement of VBP goals and support the process of measurement. HCA is largely doing this through our annual VBP survey. We also have some internal assessments that we conduct in this area. And how are we reinforcing VBP? What are the levers we're pulling to assure progress toward VBP goals? How are we interfacing with our partners or other stakeholders to make sure they're prepared and have capacity to move the needle? And as we solidify roles and models are implemented, it's important to consider how the funds might flow in these situations. And this is a high-level visual example of how funds might flow through an MCO contract. So starting with the VBP withhold in our MCO contracts, the MCO makes a provider contract and a VBP arrangement. This puts incentives on the provider to improve quality and lower costs, leading to high-value care. That high-value care produces financial rewards for providers and allows reforms to sustain and make further investments in the care transformation and improved performance, both on the health plan and provider side. Further, under the Medicaid transformation, we can visualize how funds might flow through the DSRIP program. There are project incentives provided by the waiver, and these funds can drive delivery system reform interventions. Those interventions can lead to higher value care, improved quality, and lower costs, which can then produce financial rewards for stakeholders, providers, GCACHs, and drive sustainable reforms and allow regions to make further investments in the program. And as providers consider VBP, I want to make this clear, and if you're a provider in the room and you take one thing from this presentation, please hear this. Healthcare Authority does not consider VBP to be a one-size-fits-all proposition. We aren't expecting that all providers move into full capitation or total cost of care arrangements. We recognize that providers are uniquely situated in their environments, in their localities, and it's important that they be empowered to maximize their unique strengths and their capacities and not be expected to build capacity at an unreasonable pace or something that doesn't make sense for the population. It's important to identify what the potential benefits are of various payment models and how you can increase these benefits as risk increases. This is a movement. We expect that there's some education necessary, but then also, it's not going to be, even a capitated arrangement makes sense for a provider, it might not make sense to jump right into that. It might make sense to start slow and build capacity and build understanding and really take time to do the work to transform the clinical practice to make sure that all the participating providers are supported and on board with changes. It's important to consider which arrangements are best, your strength and capacity, your patient population, patient may be based on payer mix, and understand that that might change over time, and that's okay. So how do you decide what's right for you? And if we're really aiming for better health for all without increasing costs. How does the practice level go about this? It's important to consider population health, and that's across payers. And it's all important to consider whole person care, and this goes back to the integration discussion. So how does it happen at the financial level? It really centers around the payments that are stipulated in contract and goes beyond in front of you, and how you can consider your entire patient population and how you need to perform across that population to receive those incentive payments. A lot of this comes down to building infrastructure around data and working with payer partners to share and receive important and necessary data. But then it's also going beyond traditional healthcare and thinking about addressing social determinants of health. This is where community supports and clinical community partnerships come in. This is where it's important to lean on multi-sector partners and collaborate to make sure that needs of patients are being met across the board. So putting it all together, I would say it's important that we all clarify our unique roles, understand where there's overlap, and then build on respective strengths. It's along those lines, it's important to analyze where we are currently in key capabilities. So it may necessitate measuring and impacting aspects of quality within your organization. What metrics make the most sense? What are you able to measure? What would you like to measure but need support, build infrastructure, or need additional data to be able to measure? And then what are the impacts and aspects of cost? Are there areas you can find efficiencies, or are there kind of no-go zones for your organization for the short? Determine the capabilities you want to build and how. How can you support your regional partners and or the healthcare authority? How can the healthcare authority support you? What support would you like or need from regional partners or the healthcare authority in terms of whether this is infrastructure, education, collaboration? It's important to identify those areas and make the necessary contact. And choose contracts that match your strength. Again, this goes back to VBP not being a one-size-fits-all proposition. It's important that payers and health plans and providers and community partners work together to understand what makes the most sense to contract. And give space for contracts and payment arrangements to evolve over time. This is a movement, and so there's a lot of opportunity to enhance capacity and to learn more and to build infrastructure over time. And as those improvements take place, changes and more aggressive arrangements can be realized. Now, the healthcare authorities putting some considerable thought into this roles discussion. We've been at this for a few months. I'm sure you're all familiar with Mark Province, who is recently retired, but he really spearheaded this work of considering how we talk about roles, how we develop roles and define roles. And he did some good work in reaching out to some stakeholders to start the process. And I want to make sure I have a few tables I want to share over the next couple slides. But I want to emphasize that these are just examples. These are just in draft. These aren't final. We don't consider this the end-all, be-all. And even once we do publish that we consider final, it's going to be a living document. Roles are going to constantly evolve and change. There's overlap. We might identify additional organizations that aren't represented in the table. So it's all a work in progress. So I just want to preface with that. But we've developed these tables that highlight roles based on those four key areas I mentioned before: defining VBP, delivering VBP, measuring, and then reinforcing VBP. So I'll start with the state, since I think we can most confidently speak to our role as a state agency. In defining VBP, we feel it's incredibly important that we establish clear definitions across our agency. There is a significant overlap in provider population across our programs, and so if we have different definitions across our purchasing programs, that's going to lead to confusion. So we are doing our best to align our definitions and our expectations across programs. Then it's important to define those expectations externally to our stakeholder partners, to our health plans and provider partners, and then actively engage those stakeholders for input in program design and modification over time. And when it comes to delivering VBP, this includes embedding VBP concepts into all of our contracts across Medicaid and public employees. We need to invest in and facilitate large-scale infrastructure. We are the lead agency for the Clinical Data Repository and supporters of the All-Payer Claims Database, for instance. And we also see we have a role in providing training and technical assistance to MCOs, ACHs, our public employee benefit contractors, providers, and other stakeholders involved in healthcare. And it's really on us to encourage our contractors to expand VBP across their books of business, not just with their work with the state. And we've just recently been able to do that in contractual terms, getting beyond just kind of verbal encouragement, but actually holding them to some performance keys. When it comes to measuring VBP, the state has a role in fielding VBP provider and health plan surveys each year. I feel like these have been enormously successful and illuminating, and something we plan to continue. We're monitoring our own VBP adoption and measuring quality across our program. We are working closely with the Performance Measures Coordinating Committee to specify quality metric development and support changes to that of common measures. And then we're monitoring for adverse effects and paying close attention to healthcare waste. This is where we're partnering with groups like the Washington Health Alliance. And when it comes to reinforcing VBP, this is, gets down to the nitty-gritty of the contract terms, what's going into our contracts, like the MCO withhold and some of the performance guarantees in our public employee benefits programs. We are managing the district program and are in charge of distributing VBP incentive funds. And then we need to provide strong contractor oversight. We have performance guarantees in a lot of our contracts, but it's not going to mean anything if we don't actually hold our contractors accountable. And then we've done the same thing for MCOs, done the same thing for ACHs, providers, and community-based organizations. And again, I don't want to spend a lot of time, since this is in draft, moving through these tables, but this gives you a sense of how we're thinking about this, and we would like this to be a collaborative, multi-stakeholder effort to complete these tables. And they already have a lot of content, but I would encourage those of you on the phone or in the room to take a look at these slides and take a look at these tables and think about what's missing or what should be changed. And then as we all move forward, it's really important to identify where there's areas of overlap, and where there is, that means there's an area that we can collaborate and drive towards some common goals and bring our collective influence to bear. And then where there's unique roles, think about how you can use that unique role to support other partners in advancing VBP. And so in closing, I would just say that the Healthcare Authority's goal is to move the market. We really are aiming at change. And as the largest purchaser in the state, we are committed to moving to VBP and driving 90% state-financed healthcare payments to providers into value-based arrangements in 2021. We are aligning with the national movement away from fee-for-service. This isn't happening in a vacuum. We're closely monitoring activities in other states and at the federal level, striving to learn what we can, align where we can, and really build on experience from other areas. As of 2017, we've exceeded our goal of 30% VBP. We're actually at 43%, which is a very encouraging state of affairs. Still have a long ways to go, and we are very aware that as we get closer to that 90% goal, it's probably going to be increasingly difficult to make strides and increase that target, towards that target. This is the dilemma of the last mile, and so we're really looking to the future as to how we can better support our partners and what kind of technical support and technical assistance is the state uniquely set up to provide, and where can we lean on some federal partners or some external partners from other states even, to build some of that capacity to provide some of that education and support. Excuse me. We believe that our provider partners and the individuals covered through our programs are counting on us to do better, and that we need to continue leading in this work. That translates down to the programs we operate and the work we do every day. We have a twice a year opportunity to make improvements to our managed care contracts. We have annual refreshes of our PEB contracts, and this is something we are really paying close attention to, how we can make stepwise annual improvements in these programs to drive to the end result, which truly is better care, healthier people, lower costs for Washington residents, and left off this slide, but don't want to forget improved provider experience and satisfaction. So I think that concludes my talk, and I'd be happy to field some questions. And I want to make sure that folks have my contact information, and if you have some questions or would like additional information on anything that I covered or mentioned today, I'd be more than happy to follow up at a later date.
Thank you, JD. That was terrific. Thank you for working late last night to pull this together. We scrambled to bring this program together, and we really appreciate your willingness to explain a fairly complex topic to us. So just wanted that not to be forgotten. And if we could give JD a round of applause, I think we should. So now there must be questions on some of those 43 slides. So we've got 15 minutes, and we have some questions. Yeah, and if you would mind just making sure we don't have a traveling mic. We want to make sure that JD hears this, so if you could speak loudly.
My name is John Christensen, and I'm really just here on my own. I am interested in the work of this group and, of course, in Medicaid transformation. You've stated, and in one of your last slides, which was entitled HCA Moving Market, that I think you said you've already reached 30% value-based arrangements and contracts, and it looks like you'll be at 90% in just a few years. My question is, how do you feel that your moving the market will impact the cost of health care in the United States? Because this is a matter that, although it has loudly expressed as the question of pre-existing conditions in the recent elections, was a matter of some concern, whether the Affordable Care Act itself has actually met its promise of reducing healthcare costs.
So, so I guess the question, JD, is how do you think your work or HCA's work is spilling over into the other payers in the state of Washington and their relationship? Pardon me?
The cost of health care.
Yeah, well, I think that's implicit in that notion, is both cost and quality. So can you just elaborate that a little bit?
Sure, and that is a great question. I think one thing that gets lost in the mix, and something I don't think I articulated at all, and I think is often lost in these discussions, is the cost containment is more of a long-term proposition than actually implementing these payment models. So for instance, our accountable care program, it's an ACO model with a term limited contract with a provider network. They're on the hold for a cost target that they have to hit and have to come in below in order to get shared savings. But it's not kind of mind blowing that target. It is still an annually increasing target. Part of that is because the improvements that we're making and the emphasis on prevention and early intervention, those have very downstream effects in terms of where they're going to reduce utilization or high cost care. So there, you might even see a short-term spike in cost as some utilization increases, even though it's appropriate utilization. But the short-term costs might actually have a slight increase because there's more touches in the health system. But the premise is that in the long term, in the medium and long term, those services, that focus on prevention is going to reduce some of the long-term negative health outcomes. And it's also important to note that a lot of these models are tests, and so they are unproven. We're doing our best to learn from the experience of other state agencies, other CMS programs, other health plans that have done similar things, and try to improve upon what's already been done. So it is an ever-evolving process. I would say that the state of Washington is, in general, doing fairly well on the cost containment side, given all of that. So far, we are slightly below the national trend for health expenditures. I know that that's a pretty low bar considering the expensiveness of our system, so there is a lot of room to grow. And also, I should have articulated this better, that the goal of 90% by 2021 isn't the end-all be-all. That's really a means to an end. That is a target we believe we need to hit in order to get to our ultimate goal, which is a healthier population and a more efficient health system. But it's not a given that that's going to realize that goal, and we need to do a lot more to get there. That's why we need to do things like look at waste and unnecessary spending, and those are things we're just looking at. We're not even including aspects of health waste or unnecessary spending in our contracts. So that's an area that's really new and something we have to address. So it's a great question. I don't have a magic bullet as to what we're going to do to really bend the cost curve and get it going down instead of just up at a slower pace. But that's kind of our perspective at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Jack Davies, can you, yeah.
Hi, it's Jack Davies with the Northwest Rural Health Network. And you mentioned the importance of social determinants of health and the programs around supportive housing and supportive employment. But it's a real challenge, of course, in rural communities where there's often no housing and no jobs. So that is very limited on what the health systems can do. Is the Healthcare Authority working with other state agencies around economic development or federal agencies that can help begin to fill these gaps, provide grants to build housing, provide economic incentives to attract employers to the community, ways to help these rural communities, make sure that these things are in fact available so they can use them?
Thank you, Jack.
Yeah, that's a great
and those social determinants.
Yeah, great question and great consideration. I am not aware of any work we're doing with other agencies to build infrastructure like that. I think right now the focus has been getting this program off the ground and getting folks enrolled. I couldn't even speak to the geographic reach of the program. I know AmeriGroup is the contracted health plan to operate this program from the payment side and the network side, but unfortunately I don't have a better answer than that. I know these are considerations we're aware of, but I think given timing and capacity, we've been mostly focused on getting the program up and running. But when it comes to sustainability and making this a robust statewide program, that is certainly something we'll need to consider and address. And I'll take a note.
There are opportunities there, JD, so maybe we can talk about that in our panel discussion, because we do have a representative from AmeriGroup at the table, which will be, I think, helpful.
Yeah, and I will bring this back to the team that works on this project and try to get some more information.
Okay, very good. Another question for JD. A comment.
Yes, I've had quite a few people contact me via the chat box and email, and I will be posting JD's slide deck on our website under the resources tab, or if you want to email me directly, I can send you the presentation as well. And this is Lauren. I'm not sure if I said that. Okay.
All right, I did see a hand go up, so I'm going to take the prerogative of the facilitator's role and ask a question, and that is, I've talked to a couple of provider friends of mine, and they say, well, where does the patient play a role in all this, in assuming responsibility for his or her own care? We're on the hook for a lot. So what about the patient? How do we deal with patients who may not be that cooperative? What should be the response to the providers there, JD?
Well, it's a tough nut to crack, particularly in Medicaid, where there is no opportunity for cost shares or anything like that. And given the number of external barriers to even engaging in appropriate care, you know, that's a really difficult thing. I can say on the employee side, we are really looking at benefit design and how the cost sharing structure drives patients to preventive care and appropriate services and utilizing high quality providers. In Medicaid, I think this really gets down to our health literacy efforts and need to engage patients in their care and make sure that, and it also gets to the integration point, like what are the factors that are preventing patients from engaging with their care teams? Is it because they have, you know, a social comorbidity that's preventing them from even considering taking care? Do they not know where to go? Do they not have time to leave work? You know, there's some of these vulnerable populations face myriad challenges that really go beyond any kind of benefit structure. So I would say the struggle is understood. We hear that also from providers in many different settings, and I think part of it comes to what can we all do in our respective roles to identify the barriers and that are really preventing patients from engaging, and then develop resources or outreach efforts to address those.
Okay. All right. One more question, and then we're going to break. Rhonda, a quick one.
Yes.
Can you come up a little closer? So, just so, and maybe, yeah, kind of wait, Jack.
So the question for me is that if the CHWs are going to be implemented, is there funding set aside for that? And when does that open up? I see a lot of peer support, openings for jobs, but I'm not seeing CHW exclusive job openings. And I know that being out on the street and walking people through systems of care and getting them accustomed to going into an office visit rather than the ER took some time and energy, but is that something that's on the floor of opening for jobs?
Okay, so the role of navigators, assistants, CHWs in making this network much more integrated. Thoughts on that?
Yeah.
JD?
Thanks. Good question. I cannot speak with any great confidence to the funding level for community health workers. I do know that we are putting a lot of thought and effort into workforce development and making sure that we're identifying gaps in workforce across the state. I am unable to speak to that in great detail, so that would be something I'd have to follow up on.
Okay, if you wouldn't mind, that would be great. Thank you. All right, we're going to then please give JD another round of applause and take a break. JD, I don't know your plans. If you can stay on the line through this panel discussion we're about to have, it'll start in 10 minutes, folks. So if you want to take a break, we're going to reconvene at 20 to the hour. And again, JD, you're welcome to stay or leave depending on your schedule.
Thank you very much. I do have to jump off. I have to head to another meeting, but thank you very much for the opportunity. I greatly appreciate it and look forward to further discussion.
Okay, there will be some. Thank you so much, JD.
Yep, take care.
Two NCOs over here, I'll be in the middle of that.
Question on your phone.
Get back in office.
Totally tonight.
Yeah, you want me to tell you?
Yeah, I really do. Trying to work with
He's not a reasonable guy?
Yeah.
Tells us some point in the future. Okay, well, I wanna be aware of what I want to do. This stuff happens. Jonathan's a very reasonable guy.
Yeah, when I talked to that down there, I've been in
Yeah, very sensible. Yeah, he I don't do it.
Like, I'll do it in the yard.
I am not.
I mean, they're top quality recent. They're definitely left of center if you know that. Can we have all the panelists come to the fore? Are you interested? Shawnee, Rob, Caitlin, Kat.
And then
Yeah. You want to do it, he's going to come over and go, yeah.
Just Rob, yeah.
Is the person who's with Lutheran Community Service still on the line?
So we're going to have, yeah, hi, how are you? Yeah.
I don't think so.
We'll have the NCOs over here. All right.
I'll sit at the end.
I'm
actually vacationing.
Right.
Yeah, with kids.
Too much information.
With kids and family. Broken. All right. Yeah, and broken. Yeah.
I just saw something from,
CFO.
Ryan.
Did we cancel this Monday or?
Yeah, because I don't really have time.
So that's great. I scheduled something else because I saw the email the other day that.
No, it's just the official canceling.
Okay. I didn't tell if it was a calendar invite or a cancellation.
Yeah.
So we're going to use our own in-house expertise to dig a little deeper into value-based payments, value-based purchasing, and I count the two folks on my right as one of ours, even though they go to all the meetings, I think, of all the ACHs across the state. But they've been with us almost from the beginning, so we're very happy they volunteered to talk about their experience in value-based purchasing so far from the perspective of an MCO. But we're going to start with if you will, providers of value-based purchasing who have some experience in the 9 counties of the ACH and just share their experiences with you. And we're going to start with Shawnee Haas from Signal Health in Yakima. Then we'll have Rob Wadelow from Providence. And Rob, are you with Cadillac specifically, or are you with Eastern Washington Cadillac?
Cadillac and St. Mary in Walla.
Oh, you're at St. Mary's?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. That's good. And then our chair of the board right now of the ACH, Rhonda Howe from Yakima Neighborhood Services. And then we'll transition over to the MCOs. And we have Caitlin, I don't know if it's Stafford anymore. Still Stafford. Recently married, so I thought that may have changed, but not. And then Kat Laddett from
Community Health Plan.
Community Health Plan to Washington, yeah. And then we're going to allow time. Each person gets 5 or 6 minutes. We'll have at least 10 to 15 minutes for questions from you before we conclude. So with that,
Let's start with introductions by each of them, who they are in terms of their role in the organization.
okay, if you wouldn't mind prefacing your remarks then with your role in your organization that may have a role in or may have an impact on value-based purchasing. And before I start, I just want to let you know that Chuck had asked me to talk about that, like in Yakima, where the HIV/AIDS Day has been sort of officially proclaimed, there will be something here in the Tri-Cities on HIV/AIDS Remembrance Day on December 1. So stay tuned for those of you in the Tri-Cities. Okay, with that, Shawnee, the floor is yours.
Right on. My name is Shawnee Haas. I'm the President and Chief Executive Officer for Signal Health. Signal Health is a clinically integrated network formed in 2011 and has at this point just under 800 unique providers, well over 100 discrete TINs. And we serve primarily Yakima County, although our membership for Signal Health has services and programs that exist outside of Yakima County. Rhonda with Yakima Neighborhood Health Services happens to be one of our participating members, as there are several others in the room who are part of Signal Health. So Signal Health as a clinically integrated network aspires to work in values-based spaces, and today we have 2 risk arrangements, one for Medicare Advantage and one for Medicaid, and our partnership is with Molina, so I'm disappointed not to see Jorge here today.
But on the line.
Is he on the line?
Well, somebody from Molina was on the line.
Very good.
Yeah.
So the team at Molina has been a good partner for us. We are, in terms of performance, we are in year 3 for Medicare Advantage, and we are in year 2 for Medicaid. We are very proud of our outcomes. Our members really are the drivers and the reason for the success, but that we've been able to not only meet our quality indicators without exception, but we've also been able to generate significant savings that will be distributed to our membership. Our first distribution will be in the next 6 weeks. It'll be received by our partner agencies and providers by the end of this year, and that is for performance year in 2016 for Medicare Advantage and 2017 for Medicaid. Rhonda also sits on our consolidated finance committee, so when we really do talk about clinical integration, we are bringing the community of providers to the table so that they are aware. If you were going to ask me what have we done to prepare for risk, one of the things that we've done is we've done a couple things well, and first of all, our provider agreements really do allow us to do the things that we need to do, which is to aggregate data. Data and analytics is really the beginning and the end of the work so that you can measure your progress. You can't move what you can't measure.
we have really, I think, an unparalleled base for that work. Based on what we've done. We've also been able to identify best performers and their organizations who lead, and what we've been able to do is to leverage those organizations. An example of that is around risk assessment and risk stratification, and actually neighborhood health is a leader in that as well. It sounds like I'm giving you credit, but you really are good. You're really good. But that we can see that, and we share that. We are unblinded, so the performance is shared across the network, so we can understand that. So that's what we've done to organize the work. So we've got good committee structure. We have a consolidated finance committee. We have a medical directors committee that really is fully integrated, and that really brings together a real broad section of providers, specialty, primary care, and allows them to be at the head of the table to help us really make sure that when we start looking at transitions and really the work at hand, that everybody's on the same sheet of music. Is that good enough for now, or?
Just barriers, challenges.
Barriers and challenges. I see things differently. I grew up on the reservation in Yakima County. I've lived on the reservation nearly my entire life. So poverty, disparity, social determinants, they're my fabric, and so I see the opportunities differently than many others have, and I think that the spirit of really understanding the other side is often challenging for people that haven't really lived in that kind of a space for a while. So for me, it's like breathing, but it isn't for my peers, and so I think our journey has been to try to show people that our membership and our community and the service providers that specifically in Medicaid, because we also have a tremendous amount of poverty in our Medicare population, is that people don't wake up hoping to be illiterate or have, be in a homeless situation, or to have, not to have parents. And if we can see the other side, it really does help. And if we can help those providers wrap around with the supports, those have been the key barriers. So having a provider really dealing with a challenging case, and then having the right wraparound so that they don't have to just become wrapped around an axle for that patient, but they can advance the work, and they're not feeling like they're the only captain and the only, engineer on the boat. They have people around them that are going to run the mast and hang on to the, rudder. So I feel like those have been barriers, but that we've done what I think is a pretty good job of beginning to work through those. And that's really a partnership. And there's no, for me, on the horizon, there's no silos. Really, it's us. The MCO is us. The providers are us. My team is us. And we really try to live that way. And I think that once we kind of got to the trust place, and trust is a big deal. You do what you say you're going to do, and I put it in the back of my mind because I know you're going to follow through. So I think in both cases for Medicare and Medicaid, we're there. And so today I'm proud to say that I think that's kind of a thing that's in the past. But
great. Okay. Thank you, Shawnee. Rob, a view from Providence.
Yeah, good morning. So
Walla Walla.
Rob Waldo, Chief Strategy Officer for Southeast Washington, Providence. So it includes Catholic and St. Mary's in Walla Walla. So Providence has a system, 51 hospitals, 7 states, 110,000 providers. So we're trying to leverage really the size of that organization locally, roughly 300 providers here at Catholic and 100 providers in Walla Walla. Is really sort of our team caring for the community here. We're trying to really work on it, getting upstream of value-based payment and really creating value throughout the entire care continuum for the patient. So what's that mean? We're looking at systems and that, like Shawnee talked about, data analytics, utilizing all of the data that we collect, putting and developing systems to say for a certain type of procedure, what are the varying types of implants or surgical sutures, test procedures, lab results that we're doing, and which one of those has to actually happen to impact the outcome of that patient. So can we actually drive cost and say, well, you didn't need to run this test, this procedure, use a different type of implant, and you're going to obtain the same outcome. So it sounds very administrative heavy, very cost focused, but the analytics we're building, we hired a physician, Ari Robichek, who's combining both cost on one axis and quality outcomes on the other axis. So it is looking at impacting the supply utilization well as how that impacts outcomes as well. So that's a big piece of a lot of the work that we're trying to put in place. Again, using our EMR to implement best practice alerts for physicians as they are seeing a patient in their office. What are the tests, screenings, procedures that should be done for this particular pathology or diagnosis for the patient that you're seeing is also another way we're trying to standardize that across our system. So we're in the process of combining 4 or 5 different instances of Epic into one for our entire system that will be complete next August. So it's a huge undertaking, but from a system and continuity of care, right now we have one instance of Epic in Walla Walla and Spokane, but a different instance here at Catholic. So patients, you can see the record, but it's not very seamless. So once next August, we'll have one instance across the entire 7 states, which is a huge advantage and really improve that continuity of care. So those are, that's a lot of how we're approaching this. We're also looking at, we participate in Medicare to shared savings plans. We're, looking at the bundled payment work and that many of the payers are pushing out as well, and trying to respond to that to decide how can we actually compete and provide the quality and the care that the patients need at a fixed rate, because that's not been our world historically. So definitely both feet are in that fee for service boat, and trying to figure out, as the other one's leaving the dock, how do we migrate there and stay financially viable, quite frankly. That's a challenge we all face, and still maintain the service. Mark Wackeye, who's our Chief Population Health Officer, also attends this meeting. He's actually in California today talking about how we fund the St. Joseph Health side of the organization that merged with us a couple of years ago. They have a policy where they actually allocate a certain percentage of the NOI for community funded programs in addition to community benefit. So looking at that policy and how we actually could potentially expand that across all of our systems to see how we could fund additional programs. So, we have, again, the various markets. We do things in housing, we do things in other arenas, not just healthcare traditions, but those have been sort of local initiative one-offs that we try to learn from each other and see what would fit in our communities. So we partner with a number of other agencies locally, from our FQHCs to care coordination to really looking at behavioral health, mental health services, recognizing we can't be all things to all people, and how do we partner with others doing that well to really handle that patient and try to make that a seamless experience. One of the comments earlier was around, I think the ED population, and and we talked about the frequent people coming to the hospital, how are you lowering that cost? So we partner with other organizations that really, every emergency department in the country has a certain number of patients that everybody in the ED knows their name, knows their grandparents, knows their pets, knows where they live, because they're there so frequently, because that's where they use their primary care as your emergency department. But there's some social reason why they're coming to the emergency department for that care. Is it transportation? Is it access to the medications? What is that? So we're partnering with the company to actually identify those top, 50, 100 patients and really meet with them one-on-one, meet with the other agencies with that patient, try to get them the care they need so they don't have to come to the emergency department, lowering the cost of care, getting them the care they need when they need it. And those are some of the types of things we're working on.
Okay. Thank you, Rob. I'm sure there'll be questions. So, Ms. Howe.
Thank you. I'm Rhonda Hoff. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Yakima Neighborhood Health Services. I know most of the people here. I just came home midnight last night from a 4-day conference for our electronic health records system. So, it was very exciting. Thank you very much. But when Wes had asked me to be on this panel, I did most of my notes kind of on the plane on the ride home. And the theme of this 4-day conference, there were 2 major themes that really stood out in the 4 days. The first was on interoperability for EHRs. In fact, part of this is that as those of you that are involved in meaningful use, the new name starting in 2019, if you don't know, is promoting interoperability. So it's no longer meaningful use. So, but the theme of our EHR systems, every day or most of the sessions I attended were about integrating and interoperability, and then the other sessions, if it wasn't that, was value-based care and contracting. So on the plane, I was making my notes about my 5-minute talk today, and so during this morning or before I got here, I was highlighting how I was going to whittle this down to 5 minutes. So that's why I've got my notes up here. In our region, there are 4 community health centers in our region, and between the 4 of us, we probably have about 20 sites. And so one of the things in thinking about, the first question was how we were preparing for contracting. And in some ways, the foundation for the community health centers and getting ready for value-based care was really our universal data systems, the reporting that we've been doing for many, many years, which I sort of call our federal report to Congress. We do it every year, and it's been quality reports, and there's close to 60 clinical data points that we have been reporting for many, many years. And several years ago, we started receiving incentive payments from the Bureau of Primary Health Care on a couple of points, one being national leaders in terms of clinical quality measures, and the other being just measures against ourselves, whether we were showing improvements against our own performance from previous years. And so that really started helping us learn how to look at the information that we have within our own systems and how to measure it. And then secondly, about in 2010, the Bureau of Primary Health Care challenged us all to become patient-centered medical homes. And through that initiative, we really started to learn how to become system thinkers, how to look at information, how to reformat our teams, and then how to take all of this information and when, JD was talking and when others were talking, it's sort of like, there's an old cartoon about this skull coming off and all this information pouring in. I keep getting that visual in my head. And because it's like you've got so much information pouring in, but you have to figure out how to study it and what's the most meaningful. And I think part of what patient-centered medical home did for us was help us to learn all of that. And see Michelle over here, she's our quality director, and she's the one that her skull comes off and it all pours in. And then she helps us sort of put it together. The other piece was, again, for almost all community health centers, social determinants of health is our mainstay. It's sort of why we were formed in the 60s. It was part of the civil rights movement. Part of our mission is to reduce the barriers. So building that into looking at how we were going to reduce the barriers, and recognizing now that they are considered to be the major contributors of health was very helpful for us. There are lots of social screens now that are built into our electronic health record systems. There are diagnostic Z codes that are built into our electronic health systems, and pretty soon, with any luck at all, the state Medicaid system will put values on those to our risk scoring criteria in the state. The CDPS is the acronym for, I don't know what it stands for, but it's the chronic condition codes that will recognize the complexity of the patient. But now we can at least capture them. They're going into the state system, and at some point they'll put a value on them to help understand the complexity of the system. So we're looking forward to that. Duff was our client on the foundational community supports. Anybody that knows us knows that we talk a lot about our homeless clients and our clients in supportive housing. We see about 23,000 people a year. About 10% of those folks are homeless. It's 10% of our business, but sometimes it feels like 90% of our time because of the complexities of the folks that we see in our homeless and in our housing programs. In terms of value-based care, our partners in the managed care world, first of all, our Medicaid business is about 70% of our clients are covered by Medicaid. We work with all 5 of the Medicaid managed care plans in Washington State. And over the last few years, because so many of our clients are covered by Medicaid, they've gotten very involved with us in helping deal with a lot of these social determinants. Some of our plans help fund some of our work in supportive housing, in our homeless shelters, and our medical respite program. In Yakima, the managed care plans are really supportive in helping us reduce the cost, reduce our homeless patients going into the hospitals or being readmitted to the hospitals. So those are a few of the efforts that we look at. When we talk about data and information, it almost feels like that's not a sexy enough word. Data and the information has become oxygen to us. And again, it's a matter of finding those pieces of information that are the most meaningful to us that we go into. we started contracting with managed care back in the 90s, but that was managed care contracting. The idea of value-based purchasing wasn't a term that we even knew back then. So we really believe that we've come a long way. And something that I think Shawnee said a couple of minutes ago was, you know, it's about trust and relationships, and I couldn't agree with that more. We are learning more and more, again, with the help of our electronic health record system, how to pull out the data and the information related to our quality measures and our metrics. What we're not having is the cost associated is not coming soon enough. We get that way after the fact. And so I think that's where our learning curve really has to come, for us anyway, is to be able to match up the cost of those services in a more real time with the quality measures that we're seeing. We've added registries. Am I running out of time? Okay. Okay. So the last thing that I'm going to say, second to the last thing I'm going to say, is the community health centers also last year, 16 of us also entered into an agreement with the state, with the healthcare authority, with our payment system to go from an encounter-based system to a value-based system. So in addition to our contracts with managed care, we also have agreements with the healthcare authority to look at a combination of encounters and quality. So again, with the state, we're looking at a managed care system. And then I'll just stop there.
There'll be time for questions. Okay. Caitlin, the view from America.
Sure. So my name is Caitlin Stafford. I'm the Director of Government Relations for AmeriGroup Washington. And I'll start by saying we've been a part of value-based contracting. I think actually since we started as a plan here, we were one of the new entrants into the market when Medicaid was expanded here in Washington. And then the state healthcare authority came and started to say, hey, we need you to ramp up your activity in value-based payment. We need you to get to 90% of value-based payment by 2021. We are currently in our own internal calculations at almost 80% of value-based payment, and we're 3 years early. So we're feeling pretty great about that. It's something that is not easily achieved, but at the same time can be more easily achieved with your larger health systems to get to that high of a number, because the calculation is based on your provider payment to providers, the percent of your provider payment. So a large system like Providence can really cover that in a significant amount of way, and you combine that with other health systems, you can get there fairly quickly. So what we're working on now is to look at the smaller groups that we can do. And those are much more challenging to try to do because the population sizes are harder to manage for a provider to be at risk for. So we're really starting with low-level value-based payment contracts that are more focused on reporting quality measures and being able to gather the registries, create those registries that Rhonda briefly alluded to be able to monitor their patient panels a little bit more closely. And we do a lot of technical assistance with our providers around this. I think we most often meet with our providers quarterly, but sometimes it's monthly depending on how the provider wishes to do it. And we compare data together. So we bring our quality teams in, we do a data comparison, we also fight about which members are actually attributed to that provider and which are from us versus other plans. But once we get over that hump, then we really dive deep into the metrics that they're held at risk for and the other metrics we expect them to report on related to HEDIS, or things that we're expected to report on to the healthcare authority so that we can give them some extra incentives potentially if we're getting really close to improving a metric for the state. So we do a lot of that work, and I think where we're going in the next couple of years is trying to look at, with our more advanced value-based agreements, how they can be more involved with behavioral health care and take that on into their risk pools, which is challenging. That population is really hard to manage. When as providers start adding behavioral health services and putting them at risk for quality improvement for behavioral health care is really important to us. We have certain quality metrics related to inpatient readmissions and behavioral health access generally that we would like to see more improvement on, but a primary care provider being at risk for that is challenging, especially with the state of access to behavioral health care that we have today in Washington. So we're working on working with our providers on what that looks like and sort of how we get to that over the next couple of years, as well as pushing more providers into what clinical integration looks like versus whether it's internal clinical integration that they're doing by hiring BH staff, or if it's a BH provider trying to make better connections with primary care and trying to get them in agreements where they can actually progress and monitor quality improvement efforts. I think lastly, I'll say what we're now looking at, and this is my parent company,
Excuse us, could you mute your phones if you're, well, for now, could you just mute your phones? Sorry, Kate.
No, that's fine. I think our parent company, Anthem, is also looking at this, but what does it mean when you have value-based agreements and how you involve social determinants more closely? So when we're working with a provider, what does it look like when they're actually the ones now more at risk for that patient population and making connections back into the community to be able to manage the risk better? I think that even providers who have been doing some level of value-based payment for a long time, and this is no offense to you all, I think it's just a learning process for everybody. The risk, managed care is so used to taking risks that we're really risky with our risk. Providers are not as used to being at risk, so they're not as risky in the kinds of contracting that they're willing to do, or whether or not they should have something in-house versus contracted out, and what does that mean? So we're trying to do some technical assistance and looking internally about how we can help providers contract with community-based organizations to sort of bring that expertise in, but not necessarily use their administrative dollars to actually hire that staff. So what does that mean, and how can that improve your quality scores, and how can you tell whether or not it was that contract that helped improve scores versus something else that was going on? So, sorry, I think that's the next phase that we have in value-based payment, and I'm really excited about that. And Kat and I actually just recently went to New York and visited the PPSs there, which is their ACH equivalent for their waiver. This is something they talked a lot about, and we were like, something Kat and I present about a lot together, and so we were like, I felt vindicated that our sort of thoughts were working somewhere. So I think that that's something, as we move forward with the 1115 here, is really things we can focus on with our waiver dollars and what we're actually preparing providers to do for value-based payment. It's not just about getting them into contracts, but progressing along the spectrum of risk.
Thank you. I think you covered the question. So good job in 5 or 6 minutes or less, and I'm glad at it right now. And then we'll open it up for questions and see if we have some dialogue going on also among the members of the panel. But first, Kat.
Great. Thank you so much for inviting me to be on the panel. I'll try not to be redundant. Again, my name is Kat Latay, and I'm the manager of Health System Innovation at Community Health Plan of Washington. And I think we are a community-based not-for-profit health plan, and we were founded and governed and are currently governed by the community health centers across the state of Washington. I think as we think about value-based payment and purchasing and care, as JD spoke to, I think it is important. I do think a lot about sort of the roles component and how we can continue to build relationships across the different participants within the system. One of the areas that I like to think a lot about is, again, this idea, and I think it's very similar for providers, and providers can push back on this, but the idea of how are we as the managed care plan constantly changing and evolving to really work with our providers as well. And so the idea of how are we creating a sort of cross-department, multidisciplinary team that's really focused on the change management that's needed within the organization to try to address and evolve to meet the needs of providers. And that needs to happen within the provider space as well. There needs to be leadership and really just this acknowledgement of the change that's going to continue to happen with respect to implementing value-based payment and value-based care. CHPW has been in the space of really looking at value-based payment models for at least 15, 20 years. I think what has really evolved is, again, this continuous focus on quality. As Rhonda had noted, the idea of sort of 90s managed care and really thinking about driving down costs, but there wasn't really that keen sense of we need to ensure that that does not impact the quality of care of the individual that's being served. Additionally, JD brought forward this idea of how do we really bridge into the quadruple aim from the triple aim, so really accommodating and really recognizing the role of provider satisfaction in the space of care. And so thinking about how does the allowance that a more risk-based arrangement that creates additional flexibility within a provider space actually allow for people to really serve at the top of their license, provide care at the top of their license, and engage a multidisciplinary team to really drive towards the goals that we want to see. I think the other space that we're really trying to pay attention to, as with all plans, is really looking at the national and then the state landscape. So as JD had noted, Washington is really progressive and ambitious related to their value-based payment goals. However, they are continuing to really take heed of what is happening at the federal level related to Medicare. And so how can we continue to pay attention to what's happening within that space? What is CMS setting forth related to their specific models, payment models that are within the Medicare space that they engage directly in, and how are they looking at Medicare Advantage as a space to actually start to look at supplemental benefits as it starts to move into that space of social determinants of health, and how are they testing the waters within that space? How are they looking at expectations and definitions around value-based payment so that we can incorporate that into the work that we're doing directly in Washington? We are unique. I see it as an asset, but we are only in Washington, and so we need to ensure that we're continuing to pay attention to what's happening across the nation at a national level from the federal space, but also within the state-based approaches as well, and pulling that down and how we can incorporate that into learning. I think as we move into, again, looking into the future, the idea of diversifying sort of our menu of options of types of models. And so that idea of that not value-based payment, value-based care is not one size fits all. And so how do you think about models, to Caitlin's point, that allow providers to progress along that continuum, recognizing where their strengths are and how they can really build on what they've acknowledged their strengths are and address some of their areas of maybe things they need to improve on. Within that space, you can also start to get into the details of what are you good at? What do you want to be good at, and what do you want to expand upon? And I think that that's a space where there's a bit of a tension right now, as Caitlin noted, and as others, as Shawnee noted too, the idea of what's the role of a network, what's the role of a provider, what's the role of the plan in providing the data and analytics, the utilization management, care management, disease management. These are sort of set roles that plans have really defined and are good at. But as you start to want to engage providers in increasing risk and management of quality, there needs to be ownership of a provider or the network that you're engaging with in that space as well. So there's a push-pull of what does that look like, and how do we get to that space? And that goes back to the idea of the relationships that you have to build, the trust that you have to have with those providers as you're working through those process steps, and that you're coming back and you're looking at that information together and really being honest with each other about what the relationship, how the relationship is working and what's going well. And then the one, I guess I'll finish in some of the areas that we've seen as helpful in supporting our providers is around data analytics and quality improvement support. So building out a clinical integration solution that leverages a tool that can combine claims data and clinical data to really drive improvement. And some providers may push back, but creating incentives to how you actually use that tool effectively. And as well as creating, we have a practice improvement team, a care improvement team that is trained in primary care medical home, and so we do have practice coaches that do support some of the quality teams out within the provider systems as well. So just recognizing the necessity around technical assistance and data support along the way. So I think I will, so one last thing I wanted to say is just around the New York piece, is just wanting to plug something that came forward from the Medicaid Transformation Symposium. We can get into details about this, but the Families USA report around how does value-based payment look at the social determinants of health and equity. And I think that that's not a nut that we have cracked yet, and it needs to be on the top of everyone's mind, because as we look at value-based payment, we can potentially leave equity out, and I want to make sure that we're really pulling that forward.
Thank you, Kat. Before I open it up to all of you, I just can I have that?
Yes, you may.
I just want to ask the folks on my left if you have any responses to what you just heard from Caitlin or Kat about what their priorities are.
I just have one real quick, and Caitlin's comment about risk. I think that's only about what we have in reserves, because most of us have very little, if any, reserves. And so our ability or willingness to take risk is all about the fact that you probably have a little bit more in reserves than we do.
Although we can't touch our reserves, but.
Okay. Any other comments to what you heard from Caitlin and Kat? Okay. Any comments to what you heard on this side of the table?
I think I kind of tried to incorporate it in.
Okay. Open it up.
John. Kind of a general question. Is Washington affected by and is coverage in Washington, will it be determined by the new rule allowing plans that do not adhere to or do not compliant with the Affordable Care Act? I've seen advertisements in the Tri-City Herald regarding very inexpensive insurance, and from what I understand, this is a new national condition that many people, especially those who do not have a lot of ongoing medical expenses, are given an opportunity not to pay a penalty, but just to not have any health insurance. I wonder whether that's the case here in Washington, under Washington law, and if so, what impact will that have?
Okay, so the so-called skinny plans, high deductible plans.
Yeah.
Anybody want to take a crack at that?
There, that specific new classification are called short-term limited duration plans, and Washington, I think, is addressing this in the legislature this year. I know it's been a pretty hot topic. I don't think there's been some official policy that's been done in any agency, although the OIC has discussed this. For Medicaid, it won't affect Medicaid at all. The state defines the benefit for Medicaid as in line with what the federal government has said they can do, and then they add on top of it, basically at our state. We have a very robust Medicaid benefit, probably more robust than any commercial plan in the state. So Medicaid clients do have access generally to more services than a lot of other clients. So I don't think there's an official thing, but I do know that most people are not in favor of it in our state. For either legislators or state officials, for the most part I've heard, are not in favor of those plans.
Thank you. Okay, Susan?
I had a question on it, might be related to your conference that you just came back from, but a little bit more about leveraging the CHR as a way to document or communicate social determinants between those who are on the ground, community health worker or volunteer nursing, trying to use the EHR as a communication tool for those who are managing clinically, either outpatient or inpatient. And I think the concept is community interoperability. Was there anything that you?
Yeah, I mean, we use the next-gen system, but there are so many, I am not a technology person, let me start there. But there were so many solutions that they were discussing that really promoted the concept of a data hub, that information could be uploaded to, inevitably, it all has to be HIPAA compliant, but that you could share limited or unlimited information, both with primary care providers as well as social service providers. We are we already have one registry that we use to be able to look for care gaps and things like that. We're adding another registry that helps us, I'm not sure if this fully answers your question, but really helps us bring in, for example, all of our managed care rosters to look together so that we bring them all into one place to look at those patients that are assigned to us but not that we haven't seen, so that we could go do more outreach to. And in Yakima, we have lots of partners in the Yakima Valley. So, our hope is that we'll be able to use the registries not only for our own purposes, but also to help connect with our partners in the agencies that we'll be able to find out what the additional needs are. but a lot of the conversation was, and one of the speakers made the comment that they believe that 2018 is the tipping point, is and has been, and will be the tipping point for the ability to communicate and provide the interoperability between systems, particularly large systems. With community health centers particularly, there's like 4 or 5 systems across the country that probably are used by 75% of the primary care providers. So that was the idea.
Can I follow up real quick?
Sure.
That's a great next step. And I'm just listening for the follow through that comes with the social determinants, not the healthcare agencies, but really looking at, whether the community health worker who's advocating for a client is able to help the client make deployment or land.
Well, and I'm not sure if we're saying the same thing, but most primary care providers have somebody that is the equivalent of community health workers in their systems and use their systems. So I'm not sure if we're saying the same things or not, and maybe we can talk about that after, but I mean, we most all have community health workers, so they use our system just like our primary care providers do.
I would add there's an overarching, it doesn't matter where you enter the healthcare delivery system. I'm old and I'm okay saying that, but we do not have a systematic way to identify illiterate, homeless people where they intersect with healthcare. We are not prepared. We don't actively, and I know Beatrice on the phone, this is her, I can hear her in my mind around race, ethnicity, and language. And what are you proficient in? What is preferable to you? And can you read that same language? So we're not good at that. Now, others may be better at it, but I would really challenge that really across the country, we're not even there. So this idea that we're not actively collecting social determinants is well understood. There's lots of good evidence about where to start, where it's easy to get good information from patients because they will tell a stranger.
With
Right?
the exception of the community health centers. I think that's
yes, but that certainly.
But
But there's lots of evidence that says it's tough to get at the things that we need to crack outside of those settings.
Yeah. Well, it's a challenge. I mean, our EMRs aren't built for the social determinant piece. It's all the clinical elements, and we have a hard enough time getting all those boxes checked so we can, get paid and regulatory compliance and all the other things to do it. And now to layer on another set of questions, which is vitally important and key to our relationships in the community. We just need to set those priorities and make sure we get that data collected.
And I would just add, there's a huge gap just generally in having bidirectional communication with referring agencies overall. This is an issue that behavioral health providers as well as community agencies have had forever, where they send somebody to primary care, and then oftentimes, I think YNHS is very, very different because you guys are so ingrained in the community. You have such great protocols in place to do that bidirectional communication, but a lot of places don't at all. And I think that for this effort, that's one of the main things, to standardize those protocols and maybe even get some sort of platform, whether it's pre-managed or something, or the HIT Commons or whatever, in place to help with the bidirectional referral communication. That will help improve anything, even marginally, and it's worth the cost to at least try it.
I want to, Carol, if you don't mind, I want to take a question from Miguel, and then we'll go to Carol.
Thank you, appreciate you guys a bunch. I wanted to bring about the attention to Kat and, I forget your name.
Caitlin.
Caitlin. And
Kat.
Kat
Caitlin.
Kat Caitlin. All right, they're good.
Sorry, I apologize for that. I appreciate you guys coming together as a team, even though that you represent both different agencies. And it brings us sort of unison to the message and a consistency to the message. Also appreciate you bringing your lessons learned from the conferences in New York or all the places you have gone. I want to hear more, Kat, from what you said in regards to the equity of the services and the pool of resources in allocating services. But as we're learning, the care manager model speaks about stratification and very clearly speaks about investing resources without discrimination towards you can create the biggest impact. And then with those resources, as the population requires the biggest resources, it causes the highest expenses begin to decrease. When we talk about integration, it appears to me from my very innocent eye that the pool
primary care. And when you speak to equity, what I'm responding to is a misplacement of resources or a shifting in the resources. So when I hear you say an assurance or something that is important to you about keeping the equity portion of the conversation, that is a theme that I have almost repeated every single session that we have had here. The conversation seems very strong pull towards primary care and the behavioral interventions that take at the primary care level. Those behavioral health interventions are very different from the interventions that takes place in community mental health and social youth agencies. I want to hear a little more about, I guess, your interest or what you know so far about that equity.
Okay, so we get into some tricky issues here on.
So,
I'm not intended to be tricky or all that.
oh no, I mean, I think it's a great question, and I think, so I guess a couple of parts, and so I'll take it in that way. One, I think just in general, as we think about value-based payment, the way in which it operates within a behavioral health setting is nascent. It has not been, models have not been built nationally or statewide, and I think, Washington, because of our approach to integrated managed care, is leading the way, but much of the way in which value-based payment is designed is built within the sort of centricity of the, primary care really being the quarterback around an individual and how it really connects and provides that whole person care for that individual. And I think also some of that model is built on the gap in the way in which we measure the system. And so again, as we think about tying quality to cost and trying to drive quality, many of those measures do sit more so within the primary care and physical health system space. So I think that those are areas that we are trying to drive forward. Caitlin noted the idea of how do you start to pull behavioral health potentially underneath a risk-based approach, that you are sort of really looking at that and tying cost of care and quality to that space. Where I was going around equity, and I think it can touch on the behavioral health diagnosis of an individual, but just that idea of one of the core challenges that I see with the way in which the state has built some of the expectations related to value-based payment is, let's just take a specific measure, for example, related to diabetes. If you have an individual that there are many studies that show that certain races, ethnicities of individuals are going to be harder to move an improvement around a specific measure than others. So even if you're measuring over yourself, if you have a population that is at has a higher rate within a race or ethnicity, it may be harder to actually shift that measure. And so I think as we consider equity, how are we being cognizant of what those impacts are of individuals that we're serving? How are we incorporating that information into how we measure and reward success around performance? And I think there's a component to that with respect to behavioral health, because I think we need to understand, and I may not be addressing your question, but I think within behavioral health, I think it's similar in that those individuals are going to be much more complex and need more interventions and more steps to engage. And so how are we addressing that need to recognize how we are equitably measuring the individual's risk factors to impact how we are rewarding quality?
Well, correct, because in the value-based purchasing process, one is reward by outcomes. So if there is no equity in how the outcomes are measured, there's no equity of proportion of resources.
Exactly. Yeah, and I would also add, just from a measure standpoint, a lot of the measures that we're held to, either in HEDIS or in our actual withhold related to value-based payment that JD spoke to, are related to actually getting to a doctor. That alone is an equity problem in many communities, to actually travel in person to a provider. So that, until that changes, there will always be an equity problem in the way that we measure care. Because if you can't actually see someone face to face, a provider doesn't get that doesn't count, that's what I'm trying to say. But that is really incumbent on any sort of patient being able to travel somewhere to get that service, and that's a burden on that patient. And how do we shift the resources in that direction to help them be able to get the access they need and the provider sort of count for it?
Thank you, guys.
Okay, thank you, Miguel. Carol, one real quick question.
Just one short follow-up is just, I think it just goes back to this piece of relationship building and ensuring that behavioral health providers, as they're moving into the idea of considering arrangements that are value-based, that it is a relationship, because I've heard questions at this setting and in other settings related to behavioral health providers entering to value-based payment arrangements, and I think it's just, I think it's that idea of wanting to come to the table, build that relationship, understanding what your capacities are, and then considering also how we can better facilitate relationships across the different provider systems that may actually be managing more of that risk arrangement too.
Okay. Carol, we're out of time, but.
We're out of time, and I had more of a philosophical comment, though, is that we talk about housing as a foundation for health. Housing in Washington State is largely controlled by county government. County government has the funding to allow communities to build houses that can support mental health and patients that are high risk. But often we come into conflict with what the county wants and what our neighborhoods want in placing group homes within neighborhoods. And so this is a really, really tough nut to crack. And so I'm going to put Rhonda on the spot, since you have been so successful in addressing housing. How were you so successful in getting respite care and housing for the homeless in Yakima? Because the dynamics, the political dynamics are very similar, I would say, between Yakima and the Tri-Cities, but we have not been able to crack that nut.
Well, I'll be quick. I would question how successful we've been, because like in most communities, our homeless issues is going up. But I would also say that it's not just counties that have the ability to make a difference here. There's this 0.1% initiative that if counties don't take up the opportunity to do that, cities can do it. And cities like Ellensburg, Olympia, Tacoma, lots of cities have passed the 0.1% initiative to pass affordable housing initiatives to build more housing. In the homeless network of Yakima County, one of the things that we have done, well, our medical respite program, medical respite is short-term housing, so I don't really consider that housing. That's a very successful program. I mentioned that. We've had the help with our managed care plans. We wouldn't be able to continue that without the managed care plan. So thanks to them, both of these plans here have been supporting that for us. In terms of housing, one of the big things that we have done, master leasing has been one of our successes. So we don't have a lot of housing, and so we master lease. As an organization, we master lease from private landlords. So we take on the risk. I guess this is another form of risk. We are actually the tenant, and another solution to that, if you're working with whether you master lease or not, in Washington State we have a new landlord mitigation fund that passed this last year with the passage of the document recording fees that are now the sunset was raised on that, or was lifted on that. But there's a new landlord mitigation fund so that landlords, if they rent to low-income individuals that are getting subsidies of some kind, they can actually apply if somebody punches a hole in the wall, cause damage, unusual damage, they can get up to $5,000 from the state for renting for damage that's unusual. And that, we're just starting to tap into that, but it removes some of the risk from those landlords. So I think that will be helpful to help get people into housing as one of the solutions. We master lease probably 40 of our 50 units from private landlords. And again, in that situation, our organization is actually the tenant, and so we take on the risk to get people in there. And then if those holes get punched in the walls, then our staff fix them. So that's one idea.
Okay, we're going to have to wrap up.
I can talk to you afterwards, Ronnie.
We can talk afterwards. So, we have a couple of wrap-up things, but, before we do that, I just wanted to have you, thank our panelists for their sharing their experience. Going forward, there was no meeting in December, so I don't know if that's a Christmas present or not, but, there will be no meeting in December. And Wes, you want to talk about 2019, or is it premature?
2019 is still premature. We're working out the calendar and types of activities. We've talked about transforming this more into a learning collaborative model, but there'll be more to come as we go forward. But no leadership council for December.
All right. Thank you for coming, and happy Thanksgiving. Thank you, Rhonda.